The crash landing. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the ship rattled, shaking violently in the atmosphere of a planet he'd never planned to visit. His fingers gripped the controls, but it was no use. The ship was spiraling out of control. The warning lights flashed red, and the alarm screamed in his ears. Brace for impact. He shouted, though he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The ship crashed, hitting the surface of the unknown planet with a deafening thud. For a moment, everything went black. When Jack opened his eyes, he was disoriented. His head throbbed with pain. The walls of the ship were mangled, the metal twisted and bent like paper. He could smell smoke and something else burning wires. Perhaps the ship had taken a serious hit. He had no idea where he was. The stars outside the window were obscured by the thick atmosphere of the planet, and the ship's communication systems were down. He was truly alone. His breathing was heavy, his hands shaking as he slowly unbuckled himself from the pilot's seat. He had to get out. He had to survive. Jack pushed through the wreckage, moving toward the door. His legs were sore, his body aching from the crash, but he couldn't afford to waste any time. The door opened with a loud groan, and Jack stumbled outside. The planet's surface was strange rocky, with jagged cliffs and dusty terrain stretching as far as he could see. The air was thick, the sky a dull shade of orange, as if it was always twilight here. In the distance, he could see strange, shadowy figures, moving creatures he didn't recognize, but there was no time to dwell on that. He needed to assess the damage to the ship, figure out what went wrong, and find a way to fix it. Jack wasn't an engineer, but he had some basic knowledge of his ship's systems. The first thing he did was check the fuel empty. There was no way to get the ship back into the air without refueling, but there was no station nearby. The second thing was the engine. It had suffered a serious blow. Great, Jack muttered to himself, wiping sweat from his brow. I'm stuck here, with no way off this rock. The only thing he could do was try to survive long enough for a rescue, but that seemed like a long shot. With no communications and no fuel, the chances of anyone finding him were slim. He turned back to the wreckage, his heart sinking as he realized just how bad the damage was done as Jack knelt beside the ship, trying to figure out where he could make temporary repairs. Something caught his eye. A movement, a figure. It was small, barely taller than his waist, darting between the wreckage. At first, he thought it was an animal, but when it stopped and looked at him, Jack froze. It was a girl. Not a human girl, but something else entirely. She was small, around 4 feet tall, with skin that shimmered under the faint light of the planet's strange sky. Her hair was silver, almost glowing, and her eyes were a piercing, brilliant blue, like nothing Jack had ever seen. She was watching him, standing still, as though studying him. The girl wasn't moving, but her gaze was intense, unblinking. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Was she another survivor? Someone from this planet? The girl took a small step forward. Jack took a step back, unsure of what to do. Was she dangerous? He wasn't sure, but instinct told him to be cautious. Yet, she didn't look threatening. If anything, she seemed curious. Who are you? Jack called out, his voice hesitant. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at the wreckage of the ship, then back at Jack. It was clear she wasn't afraid, but her expression was unreadable. She stepped closer, moving with surprising grace for someone so small, and Jack instinctively tensed, ready to react to whatever might happen next. But the girl simply nodded toward the ship and said, "I can help." Jack blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. She didn't look like she could help, not in the way he needed. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rough. "I can fix your ship," she replied, her voice soft but certain. Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised. You can fix it? But how? You're just ... a kid. She didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small, glowing tool. I'm not a kid, she said, her tone a little sharper now. I'm an engineer. Jack stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or run. Engineer? How old are you? Really? Old enough, she replied cryptically, stepping closer to the ship. She didn't wait for Jack's approval, immediately moving to assess the damage. Jack stood there for a moment, watching her as she began to work, her small hands moving quickly over the ship's systems. He still wasn't sure what to think of her, but the fact that she seemed confident in her abilities gave him a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The genius in action. Jack stood still, his eyes wide as the small alien girl, who had introduced herself as Lyra, moved around the ship with a confidence he couldn't ignore. She was tiny, barely 4 feet tall, yet she handled the broken parts of his ship like an experienced technician. Her movements were precise, efficient. It was almost as if she had seen this exact wreck before. She didn't wait for Jack's permission. With the tool in her hand, a glowing, humming device, she started to remove panels, tapping the walls and the engine in specific spots, making adjustments with an ease that Jack couldn't fathom. He watched her in awe, trying to understand how someone so small could possess such skill. Wait, Jack said, finding his voice after a few moments. How are you doing this? How do you even know where to start? Lyra paused for a moment, her glowing eyes glancing up at him. You said it yourself. I'm an engineer. This ship is ... familiar to me. I've studied ships like this. Her voice was calm, almost too calm for someone working on something so complicated. Jack took a cautious step forward, still unsure of whether to trust her. You've studied my ship? But you've never seen it before. You couldn't have known it would crash here. His words were more of a question than a statement, but Lyra didn't seem to be concerned with his doubts. I didn't know, she said simply, continuing her work. But ships like this are scattered all over the galaxy. I've had to learn how to repair them. It's what I do. Jack leaned against the ship, still trying to process everything. Here he was, stranded on an unknown planet, surrounded by alien creatures, and a tiny alien girl who claimed to be an engineer was repairing his ship. It seemed impossible, but somehow it was happening. Can you really get us off this planet? Jack asked, his voice tinged with desperation. I need to get home. Lyra didn't answer right away, but Jack could see the way she worked. She was meticulous, making small adjustments to the ship's core engine, tapping at wires and recalibrating circuits with skill he would never have imagined possible. There was no hesitation in her movements. She was clearly in control. Give me some time, she replied. I'll have it running again. Jack's hope began to grow, but then a thought crossed his mind. He had always assumed that humans were the most advanced species in the galaxy. But here she was, this tiny alien girl, far beyond his own knowledge of technology. I don't get it, Jack muttered. You're just ... one person. How do you know all this? You're so small. Lyra paused again, her eyes glinting in the soft light of the planet's strange sun. Size doesn't matter when you have the right tools and knowledge, she said. It's the mind that counts, not the body. Jack's gaze lingered on her as she returned to her work. It was strange. He had expected fear, or at least some level of uncertainty, from her. But instead, Lyra was as focused and unshakable as anyone he had ever met. The thought that she could be lying never crossed his mind. There was something about her, an undeniable aura of certainty that Jack couldn't ignore. As the hours passed, Jack found himself getting more and more intrigued by Lyra, not just for her skills, but for her calm demeanor in the face of the chaos that surrounded them. It was as if she had been trained for moments like this, like she had been prepared for something big, something important. "What's your story?" Jack asked, leaning in closer. "Where are you from? And how did you end up here?" Lyra glanced up at him, her expression softening slightly. She didn't answer immediately, and Jack wondered if he had pushed too hard, but then she spoke. "My world, it's gone now. Destroyed in a war one couldn't stop. I've been traveling from place to place, searching for a home. That's why I know so much about ships like yours. I've had to survive, and to survive, I learned how to fix things." Jack couldn't help but feel sympathy. Her words were heavy, and he could hear the pain in her voice, though she tried to mask it with her calm exterior. For the first time, Jack realized that this alien girl, who seemed so sure of herself, was also carrying a burden, a past that had shaped her into the person she was. Before he could respond, a loud clang echoed from the engine bay. Jack snapped his head around, but Lyra was already there, pulling out a final piece of machinery and replacing it with a new one from her bag. With a final twist, the ship's engine hummed back to life, and the entire structure of the ship seemed to breathe again. The lights flickered on, and Jack heard the familiar hum of the power systems coming online. Lyra wiped her hands on her pants and turned to Jack. "There, it's ready. We can leave whenever you want." Jack's mouth hung open in astonishment. You did all of that? By yourself?" She nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Like I said, I'm an engineer." Jack took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of gratitude and awe toward her. She was more than he had expected, and now he found himself unsure about what to do next. She was no longer just a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. She was someone who had saved him, someone who had fixed his way home. But then, as Lyra turned back to him, her voice was calm, almost hesitant. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Would you mind if I traveled with you? I could be useful. I could help." Jack's heart skipped a beat. She had fixed his ship, yes, but now she was asking for more. The question hung in the air, and Jack could feel the weight of the decision resting on his shoulders. Would he let her travel with him? Could he trust her with his life, and more importantly, with his heart? The unlikely partnership. The days passed as Jack and Lyra traveled together across the strange, desolate planet. The air was thick, and the ground trembled with each distant rumble, as if the planet itself was alive. Jack found himself relying on Lyra more than he had ever imagined. She was always one step ahead, her keen mind noticing things he would have missed. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, Lyra shared more about herself. Her small hands moved gracefully as she picked at the dried food they had, her words flowing easily, almost as if she had been waiting to tell someone her story. "I was born on a planet called Ilaris," she said, her eyes distant, as if lost in the past. "It was a peaceful place, full of knowledge and discovery. My people, my family taught me everything about machines, about how to build and repair. But then the war came. I was just a child when it all started." Jack listened carefully, his heart heavy with each word. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the deep sorrow behind her calm demeanor. Lyra had been a survivor, forced to live through the destruction of everything she had known. "The war destroyed everything," she continued. "And now I wander. I have nothing left. No home, no people, just the knowledge I carry with me." The fire crackled, and Jack felt a pang of sympathy. He had never experienced loss. Like that, his life had been simple, uncomplicated. But now, with Lyra at his side, he was starting to understand. She wasn't just an engineer. She was someone who had been broken and had rebuilt herself. Just like the ship she had fixed. Just like the pieces of her past. Jack nodded quietly. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice softer than he had intended. He realized then that they had become more than just shipmates. They had become something else. Partners. Friends. He wasn't sure where it would go, but he knew he couldn't go back to being alone. Not now. Lyra smiled slightly at his words, a small flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, Jack. I never thought I'd find someone who understands." But even as the words left her lips, a shadow passed over the distant horizon. Something was watching them. Something large, something dangerous. Jack's instinct screamed, and he leaped to his feet, scanning the horizon. Lyra stood too, her eyes narrowing. "Get to the ship," she said sharply, her voice taking on a different tone, one Jack had not heard before. Now, Part 4. The growing bond, the days of peace were over. From that moment, everything changed. Jack and Lyra barely had time to rest. Before the first wave of attacks came, the unknown creature, massive and hostile, had been watching them for days, waiting for the right moment. It was fast, stronger than anything Jack had ever seen. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the creature charged toward them, its jaws snapping. "Run!" Jack shouted, pulling Lyra by the arm. She didn't hesitate for a moment, her small form agile and swift. Together, they sprinted back toward the ship, the creature hot on their heels. As they reached the ship, Lyra's calm demeanor returned. Without wasting a moment, she activated the defense systems Jack didn't even know the ship had. Energy shields buzzed to life, and the creature roared in frustration, unable to breach the ship's protection. "Stay here," Jack said, but Lyra was already moving, her fingers dancing across the controls. "No," she replied, her eyes locked on the monitors. "We fight this together." Jack couldn't argue. They were in this together, after all. Lyra had fixed the ship, saved his life countless times already, and now she was asking him to trust her again. And he did, without a second thought. Together, they manned the ship's weapons, firing back at the creature. The battle was brutal, with the ship's hull groaning under the strain. But every time Jack looked over at Lyra, he saw something he hadn't expected, a fierce determination in her eyes, a protective streak that matched his own. It was clear Lyra wasn't just helping him to survive. She was fighting for something. More, something deep inside her that Jack was only beginning to understand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature retreated, leaving them standing in silence. Sweat beaded on Jack's brow, and his breath was heavy, but it was over. They had won. Lyra turned to Jack, her face flushed with the adrenaline of the battle. For the first time, Jack noticed how close they had become, the subtle connection between them that went beyond survival. "You were incredible," Jack said, his voice almost in awe. She gave him a small, exhausted smile. "I had to be." In that moment, something shifted between them. They weren't just two people stuck on a dangerous planet anymore. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. And as much as Jack had fought the idea before, he realized that he didn't want to leave her. Not now. Not ever. Part 5. The Alien Pursuit. Things hadn't settled down. Not by a long shot. Weeks after their battle with the creature, Jack and Lyra encountered something far worse. A ship, a sleek, dark vessel, appeared on the horizon. It wasn't just any ship. It was a bounty hunter's ship. And it was coming for them. "They found us," Lyra muttered, her face paling as she examined the readouts on the ship's control panel. Jack's stomach dropped. "What do we do?" "We run," Lyra said simply, her voice hard. "We don't have the firepower to fight them off directly, but I can outsmart them." Jack didn't argue. He knew Lyra was right. This wasn't a fight they could win head-on. He pushed the ship into full speed, racing away from the hunter's ship. But the hunters weren't far behind, and they were closing in fast. Lyra's hands moved quickly across the control panels. She muttered to herself as she worked, her focus unshakable. Jack could only watch, amazed by her calm. She wasn't just fixing things anymore. She was manipulating the entire ship, making it dance through space as though it were an extension of herself. "We're going to lose them," Lyra said with a sudden confidence, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "How?" "Watch," she said, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "I hope you know how to hold on." Without warning, she flipped a switch, and the ship jerked, spiraling through space at an insane angle. The hunter's ship followed, but it wasn't prepared for Lyra's move. It spun off course, colliding with the debris from the crash site earlier. Jack could only breathe a sigh of relief as they managed to escape. But his mind was still racing. "How did you—" Jack began. But Lyra only smiled. "It's all about thinking ahead. You taught me that." Jack shook his head, grinning. "You're unbelievable, Lyra." She met his gaze for a moment, and there was a flicker of something more, something deeper. But then she quickly turned away. Jack didn't miss it. "Let's get out of here," she said quietly, focusing back on the controls. And as they sailed away into the stars, Jack realized that everything had changed. He had left Earth, hoping for an adventure, but now he had something far greater, a partner in survival, in life, and maybe, just maybe, in love. The final decision. As the ship glided through the stars, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between him and Lyra. It wasn't just the shared danger, the constant battles, or the quiet moments spent fixing things together. No, it was something deeper, something that neither of them had said out loud, but both knew was there. They'd been traveling together for weeks now. Jack had learned more about Lyra than he ever expected to, and with each passing day, his admiration for her grew. Her skills, her resilience, her quiet strength, it was hard not to be drawn to her. And Lyra, well, she had become something of an anchor for him. Despite the chaos surrounding them, she was always steady, always calm. But as their journey continued, so did the unspoken tension between them. They had never spoken about the future, what would happen when they reached a safe place, when the ship was fully repaired, when all this was over. Would they part ways, never to see each other again? Would she return to the world that had been destroyed? Or would she stay with him? Jack didn't know the answers, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. One evening, as they watched a distant galaxy swirl in the distance, Jack found himself once again facing the question he had been avoiding. What did he really want from this journey? Was it just survival, or something more? He turned to Lyra, who was standing beside him, her gaze lost in the beauty of the stars. "Lyra," Jack began, his voice quieter than usual. "What happens when we're done? When the ship is fixed, when we're no longer running from whatever is out there?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, as though collecting her thoughts, then turned to face him. Her blue eyes, always so steady, now looked distant, almost as though she were hiding something from him. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "I don't know what comes next. But right now, I'm here, with you." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Her words were simple, but they held so much meaning. Lyra wasn't just speaking about the present. She was speaking about everything about them, about the uncertainty, about what had been left unsaid. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't just an alien with a mysterious past. She wasn't just a survivor of a destroyed world. She was the person he had come to rely on, the person who had fixed his ship, who had fought alongside him, who had shared his fears and hopes. She was the person he had grown to care about in ways he hadn't anticipated. Jack stepped closer to her, the distance between them shrinking with every step. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You've changed everything. For me, I thought I came out here for adventure, but what I found was something ... more. I found you." Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, Jack thought she might say something that would change everything between them. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand on his. "Arm? I don't know if I'm what you were looking for," she said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had never been good with words, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He didn't need to say anything else. His actions spoke louder than anything he could have said. He reached out, pulling her gently into a hug, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. "I don't want you to go anywhere," Jack whispered. Lyra's hand rested on his back, and for a brief moment, the weight of the universe seemed to vanish. There was no war, no destroyed planet, no hunters chasing them. There was just them two survivors, floating in the vastness of space, finding solace in each other's presence. But as the stars outside the ship whizzed by, Jack knew this peace couldn't last forever. They were still in danger. The bounty hunters, the mysteries of Lyra's past, the threats from unknown enemies. It was all still out there. Their future wasn't guaranteed. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He had Lyra by his side, and that was enough. Still, the question lingered. What would happen once their journey ended? Would their bond survive the challenges ahead? Or would the darkness of space and their haunted pasts pull them apart? For now, Jack pushed the doubts aside. He had time. Time to figure it all out. Time to enjoy the strange, beautiful connection they shared. "We'll make it work," Jack said, his voice low but full of certainty. Lyra's eyes met his once more. Together. And as they held each other in the silence of space, the stars outside seemed just a little brighter, as if even the universe was watching their story unfold.